Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I'm your host, Cody Goodwin. We've got the gang back together. First time in a few weeks. Alex Scarborough, Mike Rodak. Guys, how's your summer been? I think I kind of miss you guys a little bit.
It's been long. It's what happens when you've got all this moving progress going on behind you. It's busy.
If I've learned anything from moving, it's that you never really know how much stuff you have until you have to move it all. That is the lesson I always take away from moving the few different times I've had to move.
Which is why we try to sell everything we own that we can sell without feeling bad about it. That way it's one less thing to take with us.
Moving probably offers a really good opportunity to spring clean, even though we're in the middle of summer. Just like, do I really need this? I don't want to take this with me.
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot of stuff in your house. You're like, I haven't seen that since we moved it in.
Some of us aren't fortunate enough to own houses yet. And by some of us, I mean me. So, because you two are clearly way ahead of me when it comes to adulting. Mike, how's your summer been?
It's good, man. Just hanging out. I don't know. I haven't been to Tuscaloosa in a little while. Feels like I need to get back down there.
It's been a lot of overcast and a lot of rain. So, but I feel like it's just been that way everywhere, all over the South. Just the weather has not really felt summery, which is kind of obnoxious.
Yeah, no, it's not as honestly not as bad here in Birmingham as it is probably up north. I've heard from people who said 10 weekends in a row this spring it's rained.
Yeah.
So we can't complain, even though it's 85 and muggy every day.
Yeah, that's just a fact of life here.
Another fact of life. How's that for a segue? There's a few different things on today's show. The second show this week, by the way, we've been talking to Brett the last few weeks for recruiting updates because Alabama's in the midst of a lot of recruiting weekends, big official visit weekends. So we've had Brett on the show more recently to kind of recap some of that. And Alabama even recently picked up a commitment this last week. So it's been good to have Brett on the show. But I figured this week was probably a good week to bring the whole gang back together because we got a lot of things that we need to discuss, including the house settlement. Like I mentioned, we'll probably lead off there. A couple other notebook items that we'll see if we get to, depending on how long this house settlement conversation goes. But that was kind of the big ticket item that I wanted to lead off today's show with. The house settlement, I know that we've been talking about it at length for seemingly ever, but really kind of in depth over the last few months. And the short version, or I guess the big ticket item out of the house settlement is that college athletes are now officially going to get paid by their schools through what is effectively a $20.5 million salary cap. And that's attributed to the entire athletic department for the schools that opted in, which vast majority of them did. Alabama, obviously one of those schools. Mike, I wanted to start with you here because last week when it officially passed and was approved, this would have been last Friday evening, you did a really good job of basically writing out all of the big questions about the house settlement, what it is, how it got started, where it's at now, and honestly, most importantly, is what it pertains to us, maybe what it means for Alabama. I put a link to that in the show notes for those of you that want to go check it out if you haven't already. What I really wanted to kind of discuss here is kind of what do we think of the house settlement now that it has officially finally passed? What were kind of the larger takeaways? Mike, I'll let you lead off wherever you kind of want to take this.
Right. Yeah, it's done in the sense that the settlement is approved and it will be implemented, as we speak, really. It's the software systems for paying players and maintaining a salary cap and for approving NIL deals. That's all being put in place this week, next week. And then officially players can start getting paid directly by schools on July 1st. So it's, pretty much here. But that doesn't mean it's not going to be challenged in court. There's a lot of different angles that people are going to attack this, depending on kind of what their interests are. And it's certainly progress. I think it's provides some sort of framework that wasn't there previously, namely a salary cap, which is the NFL is the most successful pro sports league in the country right now. I don't think there's any question about that. The NFL is also really the only one that has a hard salary cap, to my knowledge. I don't know the NHL quite as well, but the NBA, you can go over the cap. There's luxury tax. There's all sorts of weird rules there. MLB, you go over the cap. It's not really a true salary cap. The NFL is a true salary cap. You put in a deal to the league office that goes over the cap, it's going to get rejected. And that has worked out well for that league. And so having a cap, in theory, I think is something that needed to happen if you're going to have an equitable college football league. Now, should that league be 134 FBS teams? I don't know, but that's a good thing. The problem is some teams, it's going to be less than what they're paying guys right now. When you have kind of free for all NIL, the Ohio States, Texas Techs, et cetera, of the world are able to 20, 25, $30 million teams really, because
more than that.
Right. Yeah. You can go higher than that. But
I feel like the numbers we keep hearing are somewhere around 40, 50, if not more for some of the largest schools.
For this year in particular. Yeah.
Right. Right. And that includes the $20 million revenue sharing. But even last year with NIL, you could pool together money from donors. You can make up fake deals and you can pay guys a lot more. So for some teams, you're going to be going down to the cap, and that potentially is going to raise some legal issues, especially from those collectives that were paying players, challenging sort of the anti-competitive aspect of it. You're going to have challenges from the collectives on the NIL review process for deals and whether that passes legal muster beyond the federal court settlement, because you're essentially having a clearinghouse now of any NIL deal over $600, trying to make sure that it is an actual fair market marketing deal and not just a phony. The example Greg Byrne keeps bringing up is $500,000 to post on Instagram about an ice cream shop, stuff like that, where it's kind of been a vehicle for paying guys the last couple of years. So there's going to be legal challenges about that. There's going to be legal challenges over Title IX. There already is, in terms of, does it have to be a 50-50 split between female and male athletes getting paid? I think the latest guidance from the Department of Education under the Trump administration has been no, that it's just equal access that's required under Title IX and not equal pay. But I believe the Biden administration previously had said that it wanted equal pay. So that's kind of an ongoing issue. There's lots of things that legally it's going to get attacked from different angles, and it's not law. It's not written in U.S. code. It's just a legal settlement in a federal court. So that's kind of where the SEC and the NCAA seem to want to go to Congress and codify it. What's the right pronunciation?
Codify.
It's not a word I've frequently used in speech, not in that line of work, but that seems to be their end game. And yeah, you have all these state laws too, that, like Oregon, for instance, basically said their players don't have to put their deals in the clearinghouse, and they're trying to preempt a lot of the health settlement things. And so they want a federal law that gets layered on top of that and supersedes the state laws. And really the biggest battleground right now, the biggest unsolved area, is the issue of employment, because that is still the subject of legal battles. There's an ongoing lawsuit, Johnson versus the NCAA, that deals with that. And that's what the SEC, their attorneys on Capitol Hill, trying to say that players should not be employees. And if they are employees, that it's going to cause a dramatic reduction in the amount of athletes across college sports, because schools just won't be able to pay all the wages and benefits for all those employees and all the kind of legal things that come along with being an employee. So, but at the same time, you have all these legal challenges to the health settlement. And really the only way to solve those is to have players be employees and have collective bargaining and have a union and have something that is negotiated by both sides. And that tends to stand the test of time a lot better than something else. So that's the battleground. It's, are players employees or not? That's the biggest question that still remains out there. And the House settlement does not solve that. It does not touch that question. And we'll see, how this works going forward.
Yeah, college sports very much not out of the woods, and the NCAA very much not out of the woods, even though this House settlement passed last week. There's still a lot of things that are still coming next, some of them including this week, like Mike, you mentioned the Title IX lawsuit. Alex, you were kind of smirking a little bit as Mike was kind of
Yeah, I'm
rattling off
sorry.
some
I
of these
didn't
things.
give you much of an opportunity to butt in there, but I'll
No,
give you the
it's
floor.
fine. I was laughing at the it's going to cause a dramatic reduction in athletes. That's going to happen anyway.
Right.
I mean, if you make them employees, if you're doing this revenue sharing, there's less money to go around. It's not going to exist. There are going to be sports that are cut. That's where we're going. You're taking money out of the pockets of athletic departments that either don't have money or, depending on how you look at it, are poorly run. Whichever way you want to look at it, that money has to come from somewhere, and it's going to come from other sports that don't make money. Alabama has two sports that make money. Two: football and basketball, and football dwarfs all of those. Eventually, it's going to be consolidated. So that seems like a flimsy argument to me. And if you want to get out of court all the time, the only thing you can do is come up with an employment model so you can arbitrate these things and have collective bargaining and solve these issues before they become mountainous issues. At the end of the day, like it is a good step forward that this is happening. There's a lot of road to go. I think for Alabama fans, you're left wondering, is this good for Alabama? Is this not good for Alabama? I think it's good for Alabama. The question is, how good will it be? If it is a hard cap, which I probably smirked at a little bit, because I don't think it is. I think there's still going to be schools that are going to offer NIL money on top of it, whether it's A, legal, or B, sort of illegal, and they figure out a way around it. There are going to be schools that can do that.
Can I just say,
At the very least, there is a barrier to entry for that, which in Alabama's for where they're at will help them. Having a clearinghouse will help Alabama because from their perspective, a lot of the deals out there are phony, and I think they're right. So we'll see though over the next few years. I mean, it's going to take years whether it is a game changer for Alabama or if it just helps them a little bit.
I was just going to say, what's going to stop? It's the $600 limit. If you want to pay a guy $500,000, why don't you just do 1,000 contracts at $500?
Yeah,
and I mean, there's DocuSign. You can probably. I mean, AutoPen is a big deal these days. Like, you can probably have AutoPen sign 1,000 contracts in 2 minutes. And
that's what I thought about with politics in a different point of view. Is like grassroots fundraising and just having a bunch of subscriptions that are under $50. Like,
right,
that works too. It's going to be a pain in the butt. So again, that's why I said it's at least a barrier to entry for guys who I think look at it like it's some form of cheating. So at least it's more difficult if you want to do it. And there's somebody looking at it, and theoretically somebody who can call it out, even if it's not quite illegal. So it's good. It's good. The enforcement part of it, though, we'll just have to see how it plays out. It kind of feels like to me like accusations of tampering. Everybody says tampering happens. Nobody's been caught red-handed. Nobody's been penalized. When's that going to happen? When are you going to put a shot across the bow that makes it say to these teams that want to skirt the rules, because they will, it absolutely will happen. When that happens, what are you going to do about it? That will be the ultimate test of all this.
Very curious to kind of see how that holds up as well in court, because I feel like there's a lot of just reading through the coverage, both here at 247, just other places, how that's maybe going to hold up in a courtroom, right? Like that's just the whole NIL Go thing and how they're able to maybe stop this. And I think the idea behind it is just to ensure that the athletes are getting quote unquote fair market value, but it's also like, isn't fair market value whatever someone's willing to pay? And so why would they feel the need to regulate that? I understand trying to make sure that these things are a little bit more official and not just boosters backdooring things to make payments work. But I feel like the Buddy Garrity's of the world are going to find ways to get those recruits on their teams. And I'm really not sure how much Deloitte's going to be able to stop that.
Right. And that's kind of the fundamental question that still lingers in college sports is, should it be equal? People will say this new system is not equal, and then people will counter and say it's never been equal in college football. There's never been parity. Even when any sort of payments were prohibited, there were still schools, A, making payments, but B, having more money than other schools and having more resources. So it's a question of fundamentally, should college sports have that equity, or do you just let the free market do what the free market does? And if Texas Tech can drill up millions of dollars out of the ground and build a team out of that, you have to let them do that. And you can't restrict the ability of their players to earn that. I don't know. Greg Byrne has done a kind of mini media tour since the house settlement and has said no system that's unregulated has lasted, has kind of been his argument. Which again, I made the point, the NFL has regulations. The NFL is basically socialist because they have revenue sharing between teams. If you're a rich NFL team like the Cowboys, you're essentially giving money to a poor NFL team like the Bengals. That's just kind of how that league has figured out we need to keep 32 teams fairly equal. I don't know if you can apply that to college football with the current structure, and there are forces within college football, especially the NIL collectives and the people who represent the NFL. Too many damn acronyms. NIL collectives that
we won't talk about NLI. Then.
Right. Yeah, thank God that's gone away. What's it? NIL, NFL, NIL collectives that these people are essentially saying you can't restrict us. Like if we want to pay these guys what they're worth or what we feel like they're worth, who should be stopping us? And that's kind of their argument.
Anyone, because a collective is bullshit. It's always been bullshit. And one thing Greg is absolutely right about, and he's talked about this on a number of programs. I think he talked about it to me. When you look at professional athletes, there are so few of them that have actual marketing deals. Like if you're going to give Arch Manning a marketing deal and he's going to make $1 million in Texas, that's fine. These collectives are not marketing. There's no thought of return on investment. It's joy. That's it.
Right, exactly. And it is bullshit. But their point is it should be unregulated joy, that if they want to pay their football players $75 million and another school can only afford to pay their football players $5 million, that there's nothing wrong with that. That is them making an investment in putting together a winning team, putting together a championship team. And essentially that argument gets made, and there's been some legal support to it that's the way it should be under the current system. And look, I think what this is all leading to, and we've kind of seen it hinted at with this affiliation agreement thing that's come up among the power conferences, that essentially the SEC is saying, we want to draft this agreement. If you're going to be in the SEC as a school, you have to play by these rules that we're putting together, and you can't have state laws that are trying to preempt what we're trying to do with the house settlement. Now, there's issues with that. Essentially, a school would have to sign a legal agreement with the SEC saying it's going to not follow state law in that particular state, which is a kind of a problem.
Is it though? It's not following state law. As I understand it, the state law is saying you don't have to do this. There's nothing that says you can't do it voluntarily.
Right. Depends on how the state law is written, I guess.
It's like anybody. It's like I work as a truck driver in the state of Colorado. I do it with the understanding that I can't get high every day and go to work. It's just not allowed. And the state may say I can get high every day, legal. My job says it's illegal for me to do that, or I will lose my job.
Right. It depends if the state law is written as these players don't have to disclose their agreements with the clearinghouse, or they cannot. And I would have to look at the state-to-state situation. But there's that issue that I've seen kind of crop up. But again, it kind of leads to the idea of you're in the club, you got to play by the rules of the club. And will there be a day
have to agree to be governed?
Right. Will there be a day when there's going to be the rule abiding citizens, schools that just say, screw it, we're making our own league and we're going to have our own equal salary cap and we're going to play by the rules within ourselves. And they set that up. And then there's the other schools that's like Live Golf. It's like, we're just going to fucking rake in the money and swim in the money and do whatever we want to do.
With nobody watching.
Right. With nobody watching on the CW. So
there's already league doing that.
Right. So that, again, that's kind of where my mind leads with this. There's a lot of unresolved questions still. I do think I agree with Greg on this one. Like, it's a very positive step, the house settlement is. And I think there certainly seems to be some level of teeth to it. But there are forces, and again, there's legal support to those forces that essentially say, we don't need regulation. If we want to pay guys what we want to pay them and take the money out of our own pocket, then we should be able to do that. And right now, there's still not a whole lot of power to stop that unless you A, kick a school out of a league, or B, come to a collective bargaining agreement, which means making them employees, which the schools don't want to do right now. So it's still football, rock, hard place. Like that's still where they are. It's just it's shifted a little bit.
There's going to come a time where the NCAA, less likely to be the NCAA, and more likely to be the conference, where they're going to have to say, I know there will be a legal challenge to this, but I have to do it anyways. Because at the end of the day, you've got to make a decision. There's all the collective bargaining in the world. They agreed to be part of they're your member of a conference. You are a member of the NCAA, and that membership can go away. And somebody's eventually, probably, going to have to threaten to do that and or do that to make somebody fall in line, because this merry-go-round we've been on for 5, 6, 7 years, where even the threat of a lawsuit sends everybody to the corner with their hands up going, no, please don't do anything. That can't continue. The sport will just keep changing and keep shifting, and no rules will happen. So, you can go to Congress all you want. Maybe they'll finally act, but I'm dubious of that. I think it's going to take individual responsibility, whether that's a school or whether that's a conference or whether that's the NCAA. Somebody's going to have to stand up and say, this doesn't pass muster. You're in trouble for doing it, or you have to stop.
Right. I mean, people have made the point, like, there's affiliation agreements that they want to have with the conferences. Shouldn't there already be an affiliation agreement that you're in there first place and that you're in the NCAA as well? So what's really different about drafting this other than kind of spelling out some more of what the current situation is?
That's why Mike and I want to hit the friendly fast forward button right here and just go to the super conference, where it's basically just like professional sports and it's governed by ESPN or whoever the hell wants to do it. And we can
look, like that's the last kind of piece of this too, is the whole idea of Olympic sports. And obviously I think if you go to a super conference, you're probably going there without a lot of minor sports. And that's the sticky part of things right now too, is, you're trying to find the money to pay players, but you have a huge budget deficit among your non-revenue sports. And that's kind of where the money is. The money that gets brought in by football and basketball then goes largely to those sports. And I know Greg has tried to protect that. Greg Byrne, I know Greg Sankey's tried to talk about that and how they need to protect the Olympic sports. To me personally, it's just that burden should not fall on football players that put their bodies on the line with concussions and all sorts of stuff. And they're the ones generating those TV deals. They're the ones playing out on the field. People want to come and see and watch. People want to watch on TV. For that money not to go to them, but to go to an Olympic sport athlete. And look, as much as we say like developing Olympians, you look at some of the rosters, a lot of these players are foreign athletes and they play in the Olympics for other countries. So it's kind of another layer on top of that you're developing Olympians for other countries with American football players.
And we're the only country that does this.
Right.
Every other country has Olympic programs that fund the development of their Olympic athletes.
Right.
At some point, we just said the universities are going to do it.
Right. And
that
Greg
worked
Sankey,
for a long time, but it's not going to work in the future.
Greg Sankey's kind of line on that is it's uniquely American, his college sports. That's kind of the sales pitch that he has. And it doesn't make it a good system. It is uniquely American, as with other things. That doesn't necessarily mean it's good. I don't know. Like, to me personally, I think it's a necessary evil to pare some of that back and to make better financial decisions with that. Obviously, there are a lot of regulations that need to potentially change with Title IX if that's going to happen. But it feels like a broken system, a broken model to me. And at the end of the day, that money probably needs to come from somewhere else. Whoever benefits financially from the U.S. performing well in the Olympics, whether that's apparel companies or shoe companies or the government or whoever, that's probably where some of that money needs to come from to train those athletes. And, there's obviously the education aspect, and a lot of them will come and get a scholarship, but you can't make everybody happy, I think is kind of the end of the day message. And right now, that they're in peril. You know, the Olympic sports, I think, in general, are in peril, and some of that might just be necessary.
That pivots into another question that I did want to ask, just with regarding the House settlement and maybe what it means for Alabama. You had mentioned Greg Byrne kind of going on his media tour, and he feels optimistic about this. He also has been pretty upfront about some of the challenges that are coming down the pike here. Alex, I'll throw this to you. With regards to Alabama and Byrne and just kind of the future of what Alabama athletics is going to look like and how it'll operate, what do you think is going to be the impact? What do you think is maybe going to be the biggest challenge? Like what's in store, I guess, for Alabama over the next 5-10 years?
The challenge is whether this clearinghouse actually does the job it's supposed to. Whether, even if it does, are enough teams able to create real NIL opportunities to kind of usurp the cap? If those things happen, Alabama continues to not be in the place that it's been for the last 20 years, which is the top of college football and having every resource, because they did under Nick Saban. If he wanted it, he got it, period. End of story. They're putting shovels in the ground and building things almost before the Board of Trustees had officially approved it because he had that much juice. We've talked about it before. There's just not the donor base. There's just not the pool of millionaires and billionaires and big businesses to draw upon in Alabama. There isn't. So how will they address that if it's not as fair as they want it to be? And how will they continue to fund $20.5 million every single year? It's not like the athletic department is flush with cash. They're not. They run to zero because every athletic department in the country pretty much operates as a nonprofit. So they just spend every dollar they get. They're going to have to change their spending habits. They're going to have to look at the personnel, number of sports at some point. There are a lot of challenges that are still ahead. I still think net it is a positive for Alabama that the House settlement is there. But again, I just don't know how much of a positive it will be and how much Alabama can do to sort of gain an edge when ultimately it's fundraising that is the biggest driver of putting yourself in a position to have success.
Mike, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like your money's coming from your budget already. So you don't necessarily need to raise the money to do rev share, but you need to strategically make cuts, I think, is kind of what it comes down to. So look, I think Alabama's prided itself on having the best facilities and support staff. And, Greg always talks about spending, I think, $195,000 per athlete on everything around them. And I think the biggest question is, does that need to continue? Or if you are paying players, football players in particular, can some of those services be bought by those players on the side? That's still an open question. That's the NFL. I think players have a lot of private coaches and private whatevers that they do, chiropractors and life coaches and like all that stuff. I've covered the NFL. Teams have that within themselves to some degree, but players are assumed to be able to afford those things. And I think the same is going to become true at the college level, or at least the highest levels of the college level, where maybe you don't need as much support staff around them because you assume players go out and they have their own people. So that's a question that needs to be asked, I think. And is it good to be spending that much as a school on all those athletes? Or is it just a little bit of overkill at this point? Is part of the question. But, Greg's been honest about, he's never really made any promises or any guarantees about we're going to be able to keep every sport at Alabama. I think even his most recent quote is, we're going to try to keep as many as we can, which is obviously a lot different. Read into that as you will. I would imagine at some point there's probably going to be some reduction. So again, it's necessary to me, and that's just kind of where I'm at on it.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. A lot of challenges still ahead when it comes to the House settlement. A lot of challenges ahead for what it means for Alabama and the future of the Crimson Tide athletic department. House settlement may have been signed and officially in, but I don't know that we're fully out of the woods yet when it comes to what the future of college sports looks like. So odds are good that we're going to have this conversation ongoing as we continue through. A couple other notebook items that I did want to get to today. This is also pretty late, and I know it got buried underneath a lot of different things, but wanted to talk some men's hoops real quick because one Labaron Philon has decided to pull out of the NBA draft process, and he is returning to Alabama for his sophomore season. I know Alex and I have been pretty, I don't know exactly what term I would use, but we kind of thought that he could benefit from coming back for another year just because of the up and down, I guess, inconsistent nature of the way that he played. He had some high highs, he had some low lows. I know he was dealing with an injury a little bit this year, but he has decided to officially come back. I personally think it makes a lot of sense. Alex, I was going to tee you up and let you kind of, share your thoughts on Labaron deciding to come back, just both maybe what it'll mean for him moving forward, but also what it's going to mean for Alabama when it comes to the 25-26 men's basketball season. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a positive for both sides. Shocker. But I think Labaron was not ready for the NBA. Maybe he was ready, but he didn't put himself in the best situation. Because in order to have a long career, which is what all these guys want, you really need to be a high draft pick because that team is invested in you. They're going to stick with you longer. And frankly, again, the NBA is not a place you go to develop by and large. So stay at Alabama. Change your offense with Sears being gone now and be more of a ball handler. Improve your shot. And most importantly, and on a high note, because that was the thing that really dismayed me a little bit last season was how he started off so hot and then just kind of faded. And, what we saw from him in the postseason, including the SEC tournament, but more specifically the NCAA tournament on the offensive side of the ball, he was not a finished product. He looked like he was a little bit of a deer in the headlights, a little bit out of control, and he's got to get that figured out. He has all the tools to be a really good player, and I think he can get there, and I think another year will do him a lot of good. And, oh, by the way, it gives Alabama a major weapon, a guy who can get to the rim and create his own shot. That was something I was a little bit worried about with this team. There might be a little bit of redundancy getting a guy like Jaleel Bethea, if you pronounce his last name correctly. I'm not sure.
Bethea?
Bethea.
Yeah.
There might be a little bit of redundancy that's created by a last-minute return. But that's a good problem to have. And I think he's a guy you can sort of build your offense around. It doesn't need to be all him, but he gives you a shot maker and a ball handler and a guy you can really project to do a lot more as a sophomore than he did as a freshman.
Yeah, I think between Philon and Bethea, you've got two guys now that will know how to run the offense. And there might be some changes now that Sears and Nelson are both gone. And, they were able to keep Aiden Sherrill and they were able to bring Philon back. And there's not a ton of turnover, but enough turnover with enough new faces that I think having a guy like Philon who knows how to run things, especially in the early going, I think that's really going to help Alabama's offense settle in quite a bit. And I mean, he's also a threat on the defensive end as well with, as many steals and just being able to pick up opposing point guards all the way down the floor. I think this is a net positive all the way. It seems like some of the, projections when it comes to way too early top 25 rankings and national championship odds also reflected that when Philon was, announced that he was reversing his decision and coming back. Mike, you got any thoughts? I know that we're, probably almost 2 weeks late to this news. However, I felt like it was still newsworthy enough that, hey, this is something that we can discuss here in the middle of the summer when it's a little bit slower on the calendar. But what'd you make of Labaron deciding to come back and what it means for Alabama?
Yeah, I was actually a little bit surprised in the sense that his draft stock seemed to have been rising right before the announcement to where maybe he was a late first-round pick. I think wasn't out of the question. And even though if you're not a lottery pick, I think you still feel pretty good about the start of your career. If you're 30th, 35th, somewhere in that range in the NBA draft, I think you still feel pretty good about yourself if you're there. And yes, it's good to get into the top 15, 16, which maybe he has a chance to do, this coming year. But, it's not a drastic huge difference to me. So I was a little bit surprised that he made the decision, but obviously, it was worthwhile for him to come back. perhaps financially, worked into
What I was
that
going
as
to get
well.
at. Whether there is a huge financial difference is what the 30th guy in the draft makes and what he's going to make at Alabama.
Right. Obviously, that I'm sure was a consideration. And, once everything got ironed out there, then, it became what it became. So to me, honestly, though, it's helpful for Alabama to get him back. There's no question about that. But I was already feeling pretty solid about the backcourt even before.
Yeah.
I think, and obviously there was a lot of discussion about what does Alabama do without Philon, because there had been a long period of expecting him not to come back, and Nate Oates even talking about not needing a point guard or having different options there. And I honestly thought they would be fine with Holloway and Latrell Wrightstow, assuming he's healthy, and Houston Millett and Jalil Bethea and Davion Hannah and Amari Allen. Like, I think you have some players there, and trickle down effect from that might be Amari Allen or Davion Hannah taking a red shirt. And what does that do next year? Because it seems to be when a guy takes the red shirt at Alabama, they leave. Whether it's Chris Parker or Davin Cosby didn't take a red shirt, but he didn't really play much.
Yeah.
Or Nas Cunningham. It seems like, a guy sits a year and they're out. So what does that mean? Kind of a trickle down effect. But it doesn't really answer the question to me, which, like, I feel like this team, I think Nate said it, they can shoot the ball. I think we're pretty optimistic about that. I don't know if Philon actually adds a lot of shooting. I think there's a ceiling for him as a shooter that's probably higher than what he showed last year. I don't know if adding Philon back makes you a better shooting team. To me, it's, can they rebound? Can they play defense? Can they have the tough stuff underneath? And I don't know if you got what you wanted out of Grant Nelson and Cliff Amore last year, but you're still losing both of those guys. I don't know if you got what you wanted out of Jaron Stevenson. You're still losing him as a guy who played a lot of minutes. Obviously, you lost some toughness and some stuff with Mo Diabate, and you lost some stuff defensively, especially with Darion Reed. And those are all big bodies. Those are all guys who are 6'8" or taller. And you brought in Taylor Bowen. You brought in Noah Williamson from Bucknell, and you brought in the Tarleton State kid, Keaton Bristow. There's something that potentially could be lacking there in the front court to me. I think you're optimistic about Aiden Sherrill. You think you're optimistic that Noah Williamson can make the jump from the Patriot League to the SEC as a 7-footer. You're optimistic that Bull Bowen can do what he did at Florida State on an SEC team. Obviously, you're bringing in London Jemison as a freshman, and you're probably optimistic about him. But if that doesn't go well, I mean, you're going to get exposed night in and night out in the SEC. Like, we saw it in the Ole Miss game last year. We saw it in some other games. Like, you're going to get pushed around, and you're going to be in trouble if your big guys can't handle, what the other team's doing down there. So it's nice that they can shoot. Mm-hmm. Nate's talked about Bull Bowen being able to shoot, and Williamson and Sherrill, but kind of banging elbows and doing some of that stuff. I would have some questions about that right now. And, there's something to prove just playing at a higher level of college basketball. And that was, to me, a question about Grant Nelson going from North Dakota State to Alabama. And I don't know if it was ever fully answered with him either. So we'll see. We'll see.
It's not just Grant. It's, look at the team Alabama lost to. Look at the teams that are playing in the NBA Finals right now. Length at every single position. Mm-hmm. And athleticism, length and athleticism, like that is basketball now. And I wonder, I mean, you take Labaron, don't get me wrong. You take a guy with that guy's skill. Even Adol Holloway, who's small, he can shoot the rock. He's explosive. I don't know who you take out to add, but I wonder if at a certain point in the next year or two, where because you know how much Nate and his staff looks to the NBA as an example of things, how much they start to sort of turn and go in that direction of, look, we don't want to give up shooting, we don't want to give up athleticism, but we got to find a way to be longer.
Right, and look at Florida. I mean, Florida not only is bringing in Boogie Fland and some other guys to their backcourt, Xavier Lee, but they are bringing back their 4 big guys: Alex Condon, Ruben Chinyelu, Michael Hanlogaden, and Thomas Hogg. Look, Florida's beaten Alabama 4 times in a row now, and some of those games have not even been close.
Yeah.
So that's the team to beat. in the SEC. It's probably the team to beat nationally, and I think they offer a lot more in the front court than Alabama does. So, yes, the Philon thing, it's good. The backcourt was never really the biggest question to me. Yeah. I know people were kind of obsessing over the point guard issue and who's going to run the offense and all that. To me, it's who's going to get the rebound when you need a damn rebound. And there's times last year when it just wasn't happening. Look, there's potential with some of the guys they brought in. They do have some length in terms of Bull Bowen being longer, Williamson's being longer. It's just you got to show it at a higher level of basketball. And we all saw what the SEC was last year. So that's still where I'm at. And the Philon thing doesn't really change that.
Yeah, I think there was I know we've had this conversation ongoing really since near the end of the season and through to the off season, but I do wonder how big of a loss Darion Reed is actually going to be, because when I know he was he was hurt and didn't really play a ton over the back half of the season, but when he was healthy early on, one, that defensive presence, because he's got some length to him, but then also just being able to do a lot of the smaller dirty work type stuff as a freshman. I know he's probably, he's a 5-star guy, right? He wants to go somewhere where he can be the dude and kind of be the central focal point. But like a lot of the little things that he did for Alabama early on, Houston was how close to winning a national championship, right? And Alabama beat them. And Alabama beat them in large part because Darion Reed was able to shut down Cryer at early season tournament. I know that's November compared to March. So whatever, take that however you will. But Darion Reed provided a lot for Alabama, and I do wonder how much they're going to miss that because they were not able to retain him. That was something that came to mind as well when it comes to just how this team was being built.
Yeah, the roster on paper is not as good as it was last year. Now, as we've said, the roster on paper never really lived up to expectations last year, and it's quite possible that the roster on paper exceeds expectations this coming season, but they're not going to go into the year with as high expectations nationally. I think that's already been made clear. So, yeah, there's guys that just need to show what they can do at a higher level of basketball, starting with Bull Bowen, Bethea, Williamson, especially, and then some of the freshmen as well.
College basketball is goofy, man. Alabama had a pound-for-pound better roster this past season. You could argue that they were probably a better team this past season, and yet it was the year before that they made the run to the Final Four just because they had one of the most efficient offenses in college basketball. I don't get it, man. March is funny.
They closed out the game against North Carolina. That changes the discussion. That game was kind of back and forth for a while, and they don't do that. Then you're talking about a team that did not make a Elite Eight, that year. So things kind of hinge on a couple games in March. It's how basketball works, for better or worse.
Shout out Grant Nelson, by the way. Large reason why they were able to close out that game against North Carolina. Last thing I wanted to get to on today's show. Alex, you wrote a story about one Ryan Grubb, Alabama's new offensive coordinator. The headline of this story, meet Alabama's new sheriff. OC Ryan Grubb's intensity and preparation is a, quote, cheat code for Kalen DeBoer. I'm not going to ask you to give away everything because this story is behind a paywall and people should buy a subscription so that they can go read it. It's a great story. It's a great look into Ryan Grubb and just what he's going to bring to the Crimson Tide this season. Without giving away everything, Alex, what was kind of your large takeaways or your big impressions as you were going about talking to people about Alabama's new offensive coordinator?
Yeah, I think it's really in the headline. It's the idea of having a sheriff on the team, a right-hand man for Kalen DeBoer, who, to put in another term, is the enforcer. I talked to Aaron Mitchell, the Fresno State offensive lineman. He kind of said, look, every team needs a sheriff. They need a guy who can come in and deliver the message in a little bit of a different way. And if the rules are not being followed, we'll enforce them in a very forceful way. And that is what Ryan Grubb has been historically. And that's the expectation of what he's going to be now, is that he can be a different voice. That's why when I tweeted out the story, I said he's got a Saban-like intensity. Because if something is off, he's going to call it out immediately. And there's going to be up downs, there's going to be punishment, there's going to be words exchanged, and that's just how he's wired. That's why, really the start of the story was Parker Brailsford in an interview with really all of us in the spring, talking about what's different with Grubb out there, what are you telling teammates? And he said the main thing he was asked about him, is he mean? And he said, yes, he is, but it's when it's needed. And that's kind of what he is. So when a guy like Alex Anderson at Sioux Falls is loafing on the backside of a play and really doesn't impact it, but doesn't block like he's supposed to, Ryan Grubb is leaving his room, running all the way down the hall, pulling up the play and saying, this is crap, man. You can't do this and compete for national championships. So I think fans, in a sense, should be excited about that because, look, Kalen gives you some of that. He does have some of that side to him. I wrote about that today. But his MO as a head coach, and from talking to everybody around him, he has strategically decided, I need to be a consistent force. I need to be a guy who thinks about the big picture, is making sure everything's sort of running the way it's supposed to. So to have somebody, an underling, a lieutenant who can step in and be that kind of guy who knocks heads a little bit, I think that can prove very valuable. And that's before you even get to the fact that I think you have to like his background coaching the offensive line. And I think you have to like the way he produces high quality offenses. Even the offense at the Seahawks, I'll say it again, was not bad. That's not the reason he got fired. It was because of the way it functioned and not sort of agreeing with what the head coach wanted. But I think more than anything, it's the personality and the presence he can bring to the offense that we all know the potential's there. They just got to kind of get to that point, and I think he's going to be a guy pushing them every single day to live up to that standard.
I had two thoughts while reading this story. One, the constant reference to up downs made me think of that scene from Remember the Titans where Denzel's just like, we are going to do up downs until Blue is no longer tired. Like I can just picture Grubb walking around the practice facility being like, we're going to do up downs until Jam Miller is no longer tired. And Jam is so robotic sometimes that probably is a really bad example. The other thought that I had,
like Jam Miller talking about it.
Maybe. The other thought that I had was that, like, I remember last offseason when you wrote, a big profile on Kalen DeBoer, and there was a comment, I believe it was from Courtney Morgan, Alabama's GM, who, you kind of wrote about how, like, he's got this laid back, I don't know if persona is the proper way, but like he gives off this laid back appearance. And you also wrote another column about it today because as you were talking to people for this Grubb profile, you were talking to people about DeBoer because they tend to go hand in hand and have been since Sioux Falls. And I think it was Courtney Morgan last summer who told you, like, hey, DeBoer's got some shit to him. As I'm reading this Ryan Grubb profile, I'm like, this dude has got significantly more shit to him. Like this, you talk about the word enforcer, like that's the perfect description. And Mike, I want to loop you in here too. Like that seems like something Alabama probably needs after seeing this first year of a new tenure with a new head coach, but also really kind of getting to see what DeBoer is like without Grubb. And now we see this enforcer back on staff, and way too early to tell right now, but it just seems like reading that profile and just what we got out of spring ball, that enforcer might be a little needed and could do Alabama a lot of good. Yeah.
Seems like something they needed, but not saying they didn't have it before.
It's an inside joke.
You're kind of walking a fine line with that topic. It's Kalen DeBoer probably has that in him. I agree. And there was the Rock Montgomery in your face moment that came up at the end of the Missouri game last year that I ended up asking about a couple years ago, a couple days after that. And that was kind of like the one time, and that was right after they lost to Vandy in Tennessee. So fans were kind of like, what the hell is up with this guy? And then they saw him in Rock Montgomery's face when they were winning 34-0, whatever it was. And that's like, oh, this reminds us of Nick Saban. That was what everybody wanted to see. And it was kind of a positive PR moment, if you will, for Kalen DeBoer in that particular moment. But I think overall, he's losing the battle of trying to appear like he's that sort of coach. I don't think
he's trying to. Just to interject, I don't think he's trying to seem like Nick Saban, and I don't think he should.
I'm not even trying to compare him to Nick Saban, but saying that he's not soft. Let me phrase it that way, because I think the average casual fan that you walk up to and Piggly Wiggly is still going to think that Kalen DeBoer is a little bit soft on players, and whether or not that's true. Sometimes in the world of PR, it doesn't matter. It matters what the perception is. So I do think he's kind of losing that battle a little bit. And it does help that you have Ryan Grubb there. And there's already this reputation growing about Ryan Grubb being that sort of coach. And I think Kane Womack already has some of that to him as well. I think he even mentioned during fall camp last year that he's the yin to Kalen DeBoer's yang. if you don't necessarily have it yourself, or maybe you don't have it to the level that people expect or want out of you, then it might be helpful to have people around you that do that. And look, even Nick Saban, as gruff or whatever Nick Saban's personality seemed to be, we always still talk about Scott Cochran being kind of like the guy that was enforcing the culture and smashing the trophy in the middle of the floor and whatever else he did. So you still have people around you that might kind of play things a little bit differently than you do as the head coach. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I think that's a good thing for Ryan Grubb. I don't know if Kalen is necessarily winning if he wants to look like he's not soft on players. I don't know if that's the perception out there right now. I'm not saying he is soft. I'm saying people think he's soft, and how to combat that, I don't know. There maybe needs.
I don't think you can.
Right.
Who outside of Kirby Smart is considered a hard ass anymore? There's not many out there.
Yeah.
Like the only time we've seen Sark freak out is some random TV dude who's just trying to get him on the field at the right time. Like
That's right. The
he looked like a complete psychopath.
Right.
The game has changed. Nick Saban was the last of a dying breed. Any coach who came in was not going to measure up to him. That's what Kalen DeBoer walked into. That's what any head coach would have walked into. But beyond that, it is sort of how he wants to perform as a head coach. I don't think it's wrong. I just think it's different. And I think that yin yang thing is that was the word multiple people, or the phrase multiple people described when you're talking about Kalen and you're talking about Grubb, and that they balance each other out, because Kalen can get philosophical. He can lean in that direction, and you need to anchor that. And that's why when Mike's talking about the Rock Montgomery thing, the other thing that came to mind I hadn't really thought about before then, why did it take Kalen going on the field and cussing him out? Why wasn't there somebody else who stepped up and said, this is unacceptable? So now you know whether or not there was that person on the staff before, and maybe that moment just didn't show it. From my conversation, I'm pretty damn confident that Ryan Grubb is going to be that guy. Regardless of the position, he's going to take it upon himself to tell a player when you're coming up short. So it's going to be more enthusiastic than it is with Kalen. And maybe there's a perception thing that goes on with that. But I think the result ultimately will be a positive thing for Alabama.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I do wonder, some people are probably going to be looking for that on game days. I believe Grubb routinely, and this could change this season, he coaches from the box. So you may not actually see it on game days as frequently, but like clearly from this story, and if you haven't read it, please do go read it. Grubb's going to be on these guys' ass during practice, like throughout the week. Like, and I'm sure even like through the headset, like that's, the quarterbacks are going to be hearing an earful from this guy throughout the game.
It'll be interesting to see how they manage that. I don't know. We haven't gotten a clear answer on whether Grubb's going to be in the box, right?
I don't know that we have yet, but I do know at least the last year at Washington, they routinely, Washington had, or maybe it was ESPN or whenever they had the Washington games, they would set a camera up inside the box so that they could get Grubb's reaction. I know they did that a couple of times with Sheridan last year. So,
well, that's what I was going to say. There's a redundancy there with Sheridan, and how maybe they put Sheridan on the field because he's more involved with those quarterbacks on a granular level. Maybe they think about it from a different perspective. I am curious to see how that sort of functions.
Yeah, I can see that making sense, where you put Sheridan down there on the bench to talk to guys directly, and you have Grubb in the box, and then you have Shepard down in the field, Cap down on the field. Gillespie's down on the field last year. I think Sheridan was the only one offensively that was up, or Brian Ellis might have been.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of those staple August storylines that
here's who's in the box. Here's who's
we'll ask Kalen DeBoer on August 15th or something. Just put it in my calendar.
Last thing I did want to ask before we got out of here, just about Grubb, about just what he's going to bring to Alabama overall. And Alex, you wrote the story, so I'll let you start with. So I've been doing the last couple of weeks rewatching Alabama's season, because I think there are things that we can learn from this past season that might help us get ready for this upcoming season. And one of the things just through the first few games is just the aggressiveness in the play calling that was sometimes there. We didn't see it a lot because the offense was largely inconsistent, but like games against Wisconsin, they were aggressive. Games against Georgia, they were aggressive. I would argue even offensively against Vanderbilt, I know they kind of stumbled a little bit, but there was still some aggressive play calling there. You had written a column back in It was during spring ball. It was probably in March, early in spring ball, not long after we got to talk to Grubb for the first time. And he was asked, hey, what kind of play caller do you want to be? And he just immediately aggressive, right? Like they obviously want to, matriculate the ball down the field, continue to move forward, but take the shots when they're there. We know those plays are in the playbook. I guess the question is, how much more aggressive do we think Alabama is going to be now that Grubb is going to be the guy calling plays?
I think it'll be more. Every player I talked to said that is his play style. I remember talking to guys at Fresno when he was the offensive line coach, and he said, I think it was Marcus McMarion, the quarterback at the time, said it was weird and random that at the end of scrimmages, a lot of the times Kalen would pass off play calling to Grubb. And he's like, what the hell's going on? But he said the minute that happened, dude was just wanting to chuck the ball deep. Like he's just like, that's what I want to do. I want to run between the tackles and I want to take shots. And that seems to be sort of his DNA a little bit as a play caller. Is he wants explosives. He wants to balance it out with a dominant running game. I mean, with a physical running game, ideally dominant. But yes, aggressiveness. Now, I will say, as it relates to last season, the base of what everything Grubb does, by and large, is coming out of the Kalen DeBoer playbook. And all of those games you mentioned being aggressive were when they believed in or leaned into Jalen Milroe's ability to throw the football.
Yeah.
Situations changed where it became clear that was no longer the strength they need to play to. So I wouldn't take it as Kalen is therefore not aggressive. I think that's still what the offense is built to be. But I think there's an attitude, a personality, and a little bit more of a leaning toward I want to do these things and take those shots and get defenses on their heels. And I think the exciting thing to me, if I was an Alabama fan, is that the offensive line background and the style of running the football. They need the horses to do that. We've talked at length about the limitations of this running back room. But the physical nature of wanting to run the ball as an offensive line coach, one of the player things Casey Peters told me, this guy knows where his bread is buttered. It is power and it is inside duo. Like that's what we run. And once you soften them up in that, you can do the rest. So they need to commit to it. Cody, you and I have talked about it. Mike has said that it's BS, but I think that's where they're going to try to be. We'll see if Jam Miller, Richard Young, Daniel Hill, those guys can contribute enough to make that happen. But I think that's their goal.
Mike, I'll let you get the final word in. You agree with that or no?
There's going to be a lot of disappointed Alabama fans when they win at Florida State 17-13 and they have 225 rushing yards and Ryan Williams has 2 catches for 7 yards. And people are like, what the hell? This is not the offense that we wanted. But you still won the game.
Yeah.
I don't know. Look, I think there's a lot of expectations from fans that this is going to be a wide open run and shoot type of offense with the best wide receiver room in the country, the most electric, exciting receiver prospect we've seen in Ryan Williams and, a 5-star quarterback, whether it's Ty Simpson or Keelan Russell. And you have this superstar offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, and they're just going to be throwing the ball all over the yard. I don't know if that's going to be the case for different reasons, but are you better equipped to be running the ball with a young quarterback? I say that kind of in quotes because Ty Simpson isn't young, but I don't know if that's going to be what this offense is. And maybe that will disappoint some people, but I'm not fully convinced that's what it's going to look like.
And like most things regarding Alabama 2025, a lot of some of those lingering questions kind of come back to, one, the offensive line, because they're replacing a few different pieces there. And 2, most importantly, quarterback play, who's going to be, what's going to look like, what can Grubb trust out of that quarterback? Like a lot of it really does come back to that. So as much fun as it would be to be like, yeah, insert Ryan Grubb, add water, boom, electric, aggressive play calling. It's not that simple. I wish it was, because that sounds like a lot of fun.
What about Alabama? They've won 6 national championships since 2009. Like that's what comes with the territory. And when you go out and you do not subtract from the staff, but then you go get an NFL offensive coordinator, people are going to expect that, hey, this thing's going to take off.
How many points?
Pent up aggression about what Jalen Milroe's shortcomings were on top of that.
How many points do they have to score against Florida State for people to be happy, regardless of the result of the game?
to be happy.
At least
happy.
30 or 35.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too.
Okay. Look, if they win 28-21, people are going to be pissed.
Yeah, but if you win 28-7, they're going to be happy. Or 28-3.
How dominant is the
gas
defense in 28-7? Like, was the 7 just kind of a throwaway at the end of the fourth quarter, and Alabama really kind of thumped them good? Or
there will be people who are left unsatisfied if they win 28-7.
There's going to be people left
There were
unsatisfied
people
if
who
they
were
win
left
42-0.
They were like that
This
when
is
Nick
Alabama.
Saban was the head coach. And
Right, that's
Bryce
what I'm
Young was
saying.
the quarterback. Like,
I've been around here long enough to know 28-7 win over Florida State is not going to be good enough.
For some people, 42-0 is not going to be good enough because, like, why didn't Ty go 22 for 22 for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns?
I don't know.
We have wrapped up here, gone about an hour. Fun to get the gang back together and discuss the house settlement, some men's basketball stuff, as well as Ryan Grubb, Alabama's new offensive coordinator. Again, meet the new sheriff, how Ryan Grubb's intensity and preparation is a cheat code for Kalen DeBoer. That's a story that Alex wrote. It's on Bama 247. Go check it out if you haven't already. You need a subscription if you would like to read it. I put a link to do that in the show notes as well. That's all we've got today, guys. We'll be back next week. We're going to have Brett back on to recap another busy recruiting weekend. I'm not sure that this recruiting weekend is as busy as the first two, but still some pretty heavy hitters that are going to be in Tuscaloosa this weekend. And Brett's going to have all the intel for us early next week, probably sometime on Tuesday. So in the meantime, be sure to rate and review this show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 247, 24/7 Sports. You can get all of our great coverage of the Alabama Crimson Tide. As always, we appreciate you guys for listening. We will talk to you all again soon.